Hi, I'm Ben. I'm a photographer and filmmaker on the south coast of the UK. I've been full-time for just over a year as a freelancer, and this YouTube channel is going to be an opportunity for me to share sort of a little behind the scenes of how I work as a freelance photographer and filmmaker. I had a few sort of questions just on my Instagram, which I'll put up here, over the last sort of couple months and years of creating on that platform, of just sort of how my process goes when it comes to actually creating the photos that I do. And I thought it would be a good opportunity to start up a YouTube channel and have maybe some tutorials on here of how I work, and it'd be sort of a good way to test my video editing skills as well, because I do also make films for businesses and also weddings and stuff like that. So yeah, let's give this a shot. So I've loaded up a few photos into Lightroom, and these are sort of taken at different times of year with different lighting situations, but as you can see, I quite like to shoot like a backlit sort of golden hour. You see a lot of that sort of stuff on my Instagram, but I'm just going to sort of go through how I edit these different shots. With this particular one of a car, I want to start off by basically using the basic adjustments to sort of flatten the image so that I can add the contrast back in using tone curve. So I might sort of reduce the highlights a little bit, and then I can go into tone curve and start to add that contrast in. So everyone's familiar with the 3 points on the tone curve. You want to create that S. You want to drop the blacks down in the image. I sort of always tend to raise the midtones up a little bit. And then you can start to see a bit of contrast come into your image there. And as you can see, I've sort of lowered the white point because I want to create that sort of vintage look by having the white point more of like a light grey. And now I'm starting to sort of add some basic adjustments back in, because it's a bit too contrasty, and you can change that sort of intensity by adding that back in. So once you've sort of dialed that in, you can go into your color adjustments, and quite a lot of people tend to grade their images solely using the HSL slider, but I tend to sort of more lean towards using the tone curve adjustments and also the color grading tools, as well as the HSL. So here I'm just adding a little bit of red into the midtone overall and raising those reds up to have a little bit of a red fade in the image. And I really like that film look and the warmer look as well. So as you can see, just from those slight adjustments in the tone curves, we already have a nice warm looking image, which I can slightly tweak the oranges and the yellows as well using the HSL to my liking, as I prefer a warmer yellow to more of a greeny yellow person. That's just my personal taste. So once I've sort of dialed those adjustments in, I move over to the color grading. And the color grading tool is probably your best friend in Lightroom, to be honest. Adding a bit of warmth into the midtones is what I usually do. And in this particular image, I've added a bit of warmth in the highlights as well, as I really want to sort of accentuate that warm haze that was coming through the light. But to sort of counteract, because I don't want the image to be flooded with orange, I've added a bit of blue into the shadows, because I do want it to still have that natural look to it as well. So after doing that, I re-brightened the image up a little bit, as I wasn't happy with how dark it was looking. I want it to have a natural yet cinematic feel. So I've done that, and now I can move over to masking, which is something I do a lot in my images. And here I've just used the auto subject tool to basically just automatically select the car, and then I can dial in a bit of clarity and contrast and some exposure, just so that that car really pops out of the image. And that's really what I want, is that car to just be so clear that it's the subject. So usually I use that tool. And that's sort of how we've edited the raw. We've made it look nice and warm, we've made that car pop out quite a bit, and yeah, overall that's the sort of way I would edit that image. I really like that sort of warm and contrasty look, but also we don't want it to be too warm, so that's why we added a bit of blue back into the shadows. And we also kind of want that sort of vintage sort of film look as well, so that's why we raised the tone curve up a little bit. But yeah, let's move on to the next image. So with this particular image, it's a drone shot I took in the winter. It's a 3x2 landscape, and I wanted to change it into a 4x5 ready for Instagram, so I used the crop tool straight away. And then straight away I'm into some basic adjustments. So I'm removing a bit of the highlights from the image because I want to save that detail in there. And then I want to go straight into the tone curve and start to add that contrast in. So with this one, I'm really sort of moving those blacks down quite a bit. But you can see it's not making as much of an effect as it did on the last image. So each edit for each photo can be, completely different. But I want to make those blues sort of stand out from the whites of the boat without oversaturating the colours too much. So that's where I move into the HSL slider and basically start to desaturate those blues so they're more of like a steely blue rather than tealy blue, if that makes sense. And then, removing the luminance from the blue a bit, all in aim of basically adding the contrast into the image so that the white of the boat stands out. And this is a particular technique I like to use as well, where I grab a gradient filter and just whack them onto the image, and it really makes such a huge difference if you can sort of take the exposure out of part of the image and highlight where the viewer's eye is going to be going. So I've added 2 gradient filters, one darkening one side and one brightening the other. And it really just makes the boat stand out and gives this idea of like a burst of light coming in from the side, which I really like. And then, yeah, so just another quick recrop to make sure that it's centrally composed, and then after that a couple more tone curve adjustments, and we move on to the color grading, which, like I said, is very, very useful as a tool. But you don't always have to use every single, you don't always have to use mid-tone shadows and highlights when you're doing the color grading, because sometimes it just looks a bit off. So just go to what your eye thinks looks correct. And then just a few more masking, just painting over the boat and over the shadow, really to just bring out that sort of contrast in there. And then I'm pretty much happy with the image at that point. So after a couple more just color adjustments in the tone curves, we're ready pretty much for export at that point. So that's what it looks like from the raw file to how we've edited it. And like I said, each image can be a completely different editing process. Like if I edited this image the complete same way that I edited the last image, it just wouldn't work. But because this image has a certain type of light, you just have to try and work with the tone curves, the HSL, everything in Lightroom to sort of maximize the contrast and the sort of look you're going for. But let's move on to the next image. So this photo here I took in Madeira earlier this year on a trip, and this is at a particular forest called Fanal Forest, which is, if you get the right conditions, it's amazing. So mystical, it's covered in fog, and I really wanted to sort of accentuate that dreamy, mystical look in my edit. So after cropping to 4x5 for Instagram, I started to sort of do some basic adjustments by raising the exposure and shadows, just so that I've got a little bit more brightness in the image, just because I shot it a little bit too dark. But you're okay with Sony because you've got loads of shadow recovery. And then I started to add some contrast into the image using the tone curves by dropping the blacks down and also doing a little sort of S-curve with a lift at the bottom. You get that sort of like vintage but cinematic look. And I also, dropped the white point like I did in the first image, just to sort of accentuate that fog a little bit. And then I moved into basically doing my color adjustments. So a little bit of tone curve adjustments allowed me to sort of really make those greens look way richer. But I also didn't want it to look too overshadowed, too overbearingly green. Similar to the first image, I didn't want it to look too orange. With this, I didn't want it to look too green, but also you want to accentuate the color. So I also did a little bit of color calibration, which is a very useful tool. Just desaturated the green a little bit and moved it over from a bit less of a yellowy green. And this is where I can start to get that really nice desaturated sort of minty green look, which is what a lot of people like, and I personally prefer myself. So after that and some HSL sliding adjustments, I'm really starting to get happy with the way the greens look in the image, which is the sort of the dominant color. And just playing with the luminance a little bit as well, you can really sort of see how much of a difference it makes to your overall image. So just have a little play with the sliders and see where it takes the colours. But yeah, moving on to the colour grading. The overall look for the final edit of this image really relied on the colour grading, because I put a little bit of blue into the highlights just to really make that sort of fog, have that sort of mystical look to it, and really separate it from the green. I quite liked adding that blue in there. And also I think I added a little bit of blue into the shadows, just to sort of really you know, make that sort of neutral look overall in the image, because I don't want it to be overbearingly green. And after sort of colour grading, so getting to a point where I'm happy with the overall look of the image, I move into adding a little bit more contrast in. So I use the gradient filter technique that I used in the boat shot by just dragging up a little gradient filter from the bottom and reducing the exposure, and it really sort of just drags the view sort of into the middle of the photo, because the bottom half is underexposed. And you can do a similar thing with the top by dragging a gradient filter on the top and adding a little bit of dehaze, and that sort of really adds to that sort of foggy look, which I really wanted to go for. So this is like the main like color grading and contrast of the image done, I'd say. I'm happy with the overall greens of the image and what I've done with the color grading. It sort of matches like how it felt actually being there. Adding a little bit of masking into the tree and the subject as well, just to really make them pop in the image. And then after that, I will move on to a really important step for this particular image, because there's lots of really distracting elements in the frame. So we want to remove those. We want to remove all those sort of the shrubbery at the front, and we can do that in Photoshop. So if you right click on the photo in Lightroom and click Edit in Lightroom, you can go into Photoshop and you can use the Spot Healing Brush tool to basically go over all the little bits of shrubbery and all of the dead logs and stuff like that in frame, and really just clean up that image so that, you know, your subject, which is the tree and the person, is just way more clear. And it also just sort of, you know, enhances the composition of the shot, because if your shot's all sort of messied up by lots of distracting elements, then you know, it's just not going to look as nice. So I think once you've done that, you know, looking at how different the final image looks compared to what the raw file looks like, after doing some color grading, basic adjustments, just adding a bit of contrast in with masking, and then the final adjustment of using Photoshop, you really do have a significantly better image that is worthy of like printing. So I do tend to use Photoshop in that way quite often. I often remove objects from my frame, or maybe even add something in just that might add an extra element to a photo. And without making this video too long, I think that's probably where I'm going to leave it. I think I've given quite a good gist of how I edit my photos. I might have waffled on a little bit. I think in future videos I might be a bit more coherent, but hopefully that sort of helps anyone who might be new to photography, or even if you're, you know, really experienced, you might have just learned something in the way I edit my photos that you can bring to yours. But yeah, hopefully over the next coming months I'll make some more videos, a bit more sort of behind the scenes maybe on a shoot or something like that. I'm keen to, you know, get making some more videos, and this was just quite an easy video to make whilst I'm sat at home today feeling a little bit under the weather. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and see you on the next one.